Aaron Kaufman never set out to become famous. What he wanted was to build cars, real ones, the kind that demanded months of careful, deliberate work and left grease under your fingernails long after you'd scrubbed them clean. Fame found him anyway, and for 12 seasons on Discovery Channel's Fast and Loud, millions of television viewers watched him transform rusted, forgotten machines into rolling pieces of mechanical art. The show made him a recognizable name in the automotive world, but the real story of how a self-taught mechanic from Crowley, Texas, rose to become one of the most respected custom fabricators and automobile restoration specialists in America is not really a television story at all. It's a story about what happens when someone is so deeply, genuinely consumed by a craft that the rest of the world eventually has no choice but to pay attention, and about what that person does when the spotlight starts getting in the way of the work. Kaufman was born on January 26, 1982, in Crowley, Texas, and from his earliest years, the way machinery operated held his attention in a way that most children simply didn't experience. Bicycles came first. He was taking them apart and studying how they worked before most kids his age had done much beyond riding them around the block. Cars followed naturally, and the self-directed education that began in those early years never really stopped growing. What separated him from other mechanically minded young people wasn't the curiosity alone, though the curiosity was constant and ran deep from the start. It was the patience that lived underneath it. He didn't want to make something run again in the fastest way possible. He wanted to understand exactly why it had stopped, and that distinction, quiet as it seemed at the time, would define everything that came after. Texas gave him plenty of material to work with, plenty of old vehicles sitting in garages and driveways waiting for someone patient enough to figure them out. Almost none of his technical education came through formal instruction. Skills developed through hands-on experience, first-hand encounters with mechanical complexity, and the kind of stubborn persistence that refuses to put a job down until the result is genuinely right rather than merely acceptable. As his abilities sharpened, people in Texas automotive circles began noticing something different about the quality of his work. The repairs were precise, clean, and constructed to hold in a way that set them apart from what most shops were producing. A reputation for careful, accurate fabrication work built around him before he had any public profile at all, and that reputation eventually led him to a position that would redirect his life entirely. At a Texas auto shop, Kaufman crossed paths with Richard Rawlings, a fellow Texan operating on a very different frequency, promotional, commercially minded, and always calculating the next move. Rawlings recognized the quality of what Kaufman could do and hired him for Gas Monkey Garage, a business Rawlings was building around the buying, fixing, and reselling of vintage and high-performance automobiles before the operation had even fully found its footing. The Discovery Channel saw a television program in what Gas Monkey Garage was doing, and Fast and Loud premiered in 2012, building a substantial audience quickly. What reality television captured here, whether it intended to or not, was a genuine friction between two people who wanted different things from the same project. Rawlings tracked the clock and watched the numbers, measuring progress against deadlines and the eventual resale price. Kaufman watched the work itself, measuring progress against the standard of what a build could actually become when given the time and attention it deserved. Every collision of those two priorities on camera gave viewers a window into something authentic, not manufactured conflict assembled for broadcast, but the real tension that exists in any workspace where craftsmanship and commerce are required to share the same floor. Automobile restoration is unforgiving in that way, and the gap between a job done properly and a job done quickly shows up clearly in the finished vehicle, and Kaufman understood that gap better than almost anyone in the industry. His responsibilities at Gas Monkey went far past engine work, thorough as his command of power plants was. Bodywork, upholstery, and the fabrication of custom components that frequently had to be designed and built from scratch because no existing part did what he was trying to accomplish all fell under his watch. The vehicles that left Gas Monkey Garage under his supervision weren't just repaired versions of what had come in. They were reconceived, pushed past what their original designers had imagined or intended. Kaufman carried a consistent habit of looking at a deteriorated motor vehicle and seeing not what it was at that moment, but what it could become with the right engineering, the right design thinking, and enough time. That forward-looking vision repeatedly led him to propose modifications that Rawlings considered too expensive, too complicated, or simply taking longer than the schedule could absorb. The arguments were genuine, aired in front of cameras and a national audience, and they revealed something that most workshop conflicts don't. Two people who disagreed completely on method but shared an underlying commitment to producing something worth keeping. Among the builds that best illustrated Kaufman's abilities, the 1976 Ford Bronco stands as one of the clearest examples. Off-road vehicles carry their own devoted following in the automotive community, and the Bronco already held significant cultural weight before Kaufman touched it. His interpretation rebuilt the suspension entirely, installed a powerful new engine, and wrapped everything in a custom exterior aggressive enough to honor the original design, while making obvious that this was something considerably different. The result was a vehicle that performed as well as it looked, which had always been the standard Kaufman held himself to. The 1963 Ford Falcon project made a different argument about his range as a fabricator. Starting with a modest family car, Kaufman and the Gas Monkey team installed a roll cage, dropped in a contemporary V8 engine, and upgraded the suspension until the Falcon could credibly perform on a racetrack. That project demonstrated his versatility, the capacity to take almost any starting point and push it in a direction nobody initially expected it to go, without losing the thread of what made the original vehicle interesting. 12 seasons is a long time to do anything on those terms, and by 2017, when Kaufman decided to leave Fast and Loud and Gas Monkey garage, the reasons had been building quietly for years. Television production has its own logic, and that logic doesn't always serve the people doing the actual technical work. Deadlines tightened as the show continued, the pressure to generate watchable conflict increased, and the quality of the automotive work started feeling secondary to the performance of it. Kaufman stated plainly in interviews that his goal was to build cars with lasting technical and aesthetic value, not television builds designed to photograph well in a reveal shot and turn over quickly to the next episode. The departure surprised fans who had watched him carry the show's credibility across its entire run, but anyone paying careful attention to his public statements over the previous few seasons recognized that the split had been approaching for some time, and that the only real question was when it would become official. What came next said everything about where his priorities had always been. Rather than pursue another television deal, Kaufman launched Arclight Fabrication in Dallas, building the business entirely around producing premium parts and providing expert restoration guidance for vintage Ford F-100 trucks. The pickup truck has its own passionate following among collectors and custom vehicle enthusiasts, and Arclight rose quickly to become the most trusted resource for F-100 owners seeking high-quality components backed by the depth of technical knowledge that only comes from years of working intimately with these specific vehicles. That business gave Kaufman something television never fully provided: the freedom to take exactly as long as a project needed, with no network schedule to answer to and no production crew waiting for a reveal that had to fit a runtime. The standards were entirely his own, the timeline was his own, and the work reflected both of those facts in ways that anyone handling the finished parts could feel immediately. The Ford F-100 standing in the custom truck world has risen considerably over recent years, and Kaufman's work at Arclight Fabrication has played a real role in driving that shift. Among American vintage trucks, the Chevy C10 had long occupied a position of particular prominence in collector and builder culture, but the F-100 has built its own reputation steadily alongside it, and the quality of Arclight's components has helped establish it as a serious platform in the eyes of builders who might previously have chosen other vehicles. Parts that didn't exist in any production form now exist because Arclight designed and manufactured them, and that contribution to the broader restoration community has genuinely expanded what F-100 owners can accomplish with their vehicles. Television came back in 2018 when Shifting Gears with Aron Kaufman launched on the Discovery Channel. The show ran for 2 seasons and structured itself around Kaufman's actual creative interests rather than around a business model or a co-owner's financial targets. Hot rod culture, off-road racing vehicles, experimental one-off custom builds, the project's Shifting Gears documented went places that Fast and Loud's format never would have permitted, and Kaufman worked without a business partner pulling decisions in a commercial direction at every turn. 2 seasons is a short run, but the work the show captured was more genuinely representative of what Kaufman cared about than most of what had aired during the previous decade working under someone else's priorities and timeline. His influence on the broader custom automotive industry extends well past any television audience his shows produced. Younger fabricators and mechanics working in automobile restoration and custom builds regularly name him as proof that patience and refusal to compromise on quality are not obstacles to a successful career. They are, in fact, the foundation that serious reputations are built on and the quality that separates lasting work from work that simply gets finished. The philosophy that runs through everything he does treats every vehicle as its own specific problem requiring its own specific solution, and that approach resists the standardized thinking that can quietly reduce even talented builders to predictable, uninspired work over time. Kaufman's method involves understanding a car's original character, working with what made it worth restoring in the first place, and identifying exactly where modern engineering improves it without erasing the qualities that defined it. That balance between genuine respect for vintage automobile design and a practical willingness to apply modern engineering where it actually benefits the vehicle is the territory his work has occupied throughout his entire career. He doesn't treat originals as untouchable, but he also doesn't strip a classic vehicle of its identity purely to add performance numbers. The best builds coming out of his shop hold both qualities simultaneously. They feel like what the original vehicle was, only sharper, more capable, and constructed with a clarity of purpose that runs through every component. That sensibility has spread outward and influenced how a generation of people working in hot rod design and truck restoration think about the relationship between a vehicle's history and the potential that history contains. Patience comes up consistently in any serious account of how Kaufman actually works, not as an innate personality trait, but as a deliberate professional method applied every time a new project begins. Engine builds, fabricated metal components, bodywork, paint, suspension geometry, everything moves at the pace the work demands, not the pace a deadline would prefer. That standard was what built his reputation in Texas automotive shops years before Gas Monkey Garage existed. It was what kept Fast and Loud worth watching across 12 seasons, and it is what Arclight Fabrication continues to operate on today. The television years produced a wide audience and a name that people in the automotive world recognize without hesitation, but what actually earned the trust of fellow builders, collectors, and every person who has ever handed him a vehicle to work on has been the same thing from the beginning. The quality sitting in the garage when the job is finally done, with no cameras running and no clock to beat.